He's a very nice energy about him, and everybody says that when they meet Fran. He just has a warmth and, you know, openness about him, and yeah, I think that's what I noticed. And
Gather round, because Luke Evans just blew the internet wide open. This man, this absolute specimen of a Welsh action hero, has been keeping secrets for years. And now, at 46, he's written a whole entire book and spilled everything. His past loves, his dramatic heartbreaks, who he's building a life with right now. Honey, the tea is scalding hot. So grab your drink, get comfortable, and let's talk about Luke Evans's entire romantic timeline. Because nothing is what you think it was. Setting the scene. For anyone who somehow wandered into this video without knowing who Luke Evans is, let me fix that immediately. Because you need the full picture to understand why this story hits so differently. Luke Evans is a Welsh actor, singer, businessman, and let's be honest, one of the most effortlessly good-looking human beings to ever exist on this planet. If you've seen The Hobbit, Fast and Furious, Beauty and the Beast, Dracula Untold, or 9 Perfect Strangers on Hulu, you already know his face. The man has been Hollywood royalty for well over a decade at this point. He's played villains, he's played heroes, he's played Gaston, the ultimate charismatic bad boy, and he has done all of it with a level of swagger that really shouldn't be legal. But here's what makes Luke Evans genuinely fascinating beyond the muscles and the movie roles, is his backstory. Because behind all those action sequences and red carpet moments is a story that is genuinely jaw-dropping if you sit with it. Luke Evans grew up in the Rhymney Valley in South Wales, and not just any upbringing. His family were devout Jehovah's Witnesses. He was an only child, raised in a deeply religious household, in a small village, with a faith that had very specific ideas about who you were allowed to be. And from a very young age, Luke Evans knew he didn't quite fit the mold. He has spoken and written about being bullied at school. And we're not talking the occasional teasing. He was bullied because of his religion and because of his perceived sexuality. In his 2024 memoir, Boy from the Valleys, Evans reflects on that experience with brutal honesty, writing, "I was bullied for being gay before I even understood what it meant." Can you imagine? This man who now graces the covers of international magazines and gets literally photographed in swimming trunks for his own fashion brand, was once a kid in a Welsh valley being torn apart just for existing. At 17 years old, he made the brave, terrifying decision to leave home and start over. He landed in London, found his community, found the stage, and then found Hollywood. He performed on the West End in iconic productions like Miss Saigon, Avenue Q, and Rent before catching the eye of casting directors who saw something movie star-shaped in him. And here's something that often gets glossed over in the mainstream press. Luke Evans came out publicly in the early 2000s, back when he was doing theater. He was openly gay in his London life. But when Hollywood came knocking, things got complicated. For a period, his personal life became deliberately vague in interviews, because the movie industry at the time wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet for openly gay action heroes. He has since been described in the press as the first openly gay action hero in Hollywood, and he's spoken about the quiet responsibility he feels in that position. So when this man sits down to write a memoir at 46 and decides to tell the full, unfiltered truth about his love life, that's not just celebrity gossip. That's a man deciding his whole story is finally worth telling out loud. And baby, did he tell it. So what was in the book that had people absolutely losing their minds? And which relationship did he describe in terms that made the entire internet clutch its pearls? The memoir that blew everything open. In 2024, Luke Evans published Boy from the Valleys, My Unexpected Journey. And I want to be very clear that this is not your standard celebrity memoir. This is not a ghost-written PR exercise with a soft-focus cover photo and a bunch of anecdotes about meeting famous people at parties. This thing is raw. It is honest. It is, at times, genuinely painful to read. He talks about the Jehovah's Witness community cutting him off when he left the faith, a process that essentially meant losing his entire social world overnight. He talks about finding his people in London's queer community. He talks about the terror of coming out to his parents, knowing it might mean losing them too. In Boy from the Valleys, Evans reflects directly on the religion that shaped and constrained his early years. Where's the compassion, the acceptance that we're all different? I find it astonishing that religious dogma can lead people to act so heartlessly. This is a man who has done the internal work, who has looked back at his life with unflinching clarity and decided that the people reading his words deserve honesty, not a polished PR version of events. And since the memoir's publication, Evans has spoken about receiving messages from people around the world who resonated with his journey. People who grew up in restrictive religious environments, people who were bullied for their sexuality, people who felt like they didn't belong, all writing to tell him that his story made them feel less alone. That's the real power of this book. But let's talk about the chapters that had the celebrity gossip community absolutely vibrating. Because Luke Evans, who spent years keeping his romantic life deliberately private, went into his memoir and named names, described feelings, talked about heartbreak, with the kind of emotional specificity that makes you feel like you're reading someone's diary. And the name that came up the most? The relationship that got its own whole dramatic chapter? The love story that people have been speculating about for a decade? John Cortajarena. But before we get into the actual John chapter, because trust me, you are not ready, let me give you a quick crash course on their history so you understand exactly why this reveal hit so hard. The John Cortajarena era, the relationship that wrecked him in the best and worst way. This is the section you came here for. This is the chapter that went viral. This is the part of the memoir that had people posting screenshots at midnight going, "Are you seeing this?" John Cortajarena, if you need a reference point, is a Spanish supermodel from the Basque Country. He is the kind of beautiful that makes you question reality. He has walked for Giorgio Armani, Versace, and Diesel. He moves in the orbit of people like Madonna. He is famous, glamorous, and deeply private about his personal life, which made the fact that Luke Evans wrote an entire chapter about their relationship all the more seismic. The story begins in May 2014 at the Amphar Gala during the Cannes Film Festival, which is, let's be honest, the most glamorous possible setting for a love story to start. Luke Evans sees John Cortajarena across the room and is immediately captivated. In his memoir, he describes being completely stunned by the model's beauty and presence. Photos of them together at that event went around the world, and even though they weren't dating yet, Evans describes those photos as almost prophetic, because a few weeks later, their love story began. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Evans describes this as the first time he had dated someone equally famous, and neither of them quite knew how to handle that. The media attention was intense. The pressure was constant. Two very public, very beautiful, very busy people trying to figure out how to love each other while the whole world is watching. According to a passage from the memoir that was previewed exclusively by Vanity Fair Spain ahead of the book's Spanish release in May 2025, Evans describes their relationship as being like flamenco, full of love and passion, but also of fury and torment and drama. That is literally how he described it. Flamenco, full of fury and torment and drama. I want you to sit with that for a second. This wasn't a quiet, comfortable love. This was fire and chaos. He describes them as a volatile couple who had the most dramatic arguments. And then he gives us the detail that broke the internet, that on multiple occasions he stormed out of John's New York apartment in the middle of winter, suitcase in hand, only to turn around and go back in the cold. I am losing my mind at this image. Luke Evans, this man, this big action hero, dragging his suitcase through the streets of New York in January because of a lover's quarrel, only to eventually swallow his pride and go back. We have all been that person. Every single one of us has had a relationship that had us doing things we would never in a million years admit to. And here is Luke Evans just putting it in a published book for the whole world to read. But then he says something that is perhaps the most honest, gut-punch line in the entire memoir. In Boy from the Valleys, Evans reflects on what ultimately doomed them. It was addictive. John was addictive. The drama was too. But in the end, it overwhelmed us. Addictive. That word. Because we've all had that kind of love, haven't we? The kind that isn't good for you, that you know isn't sustainable, but you can't stop reaching for it, because when it's good, it's the best feeling in the world, and when it's bad, it's the most alive you've ever felt. Evans describes in the memoir how the relationship ultimately ended in a way he calls very sad. So sad that he doesn't go into full detail, even in the book. And for a while afterward, it was too painful for them to even be in the same room together. In Boy from the Valleys, he reflects, "It took us a long time to be in the same room together." That's real heartbreak language. Not the sanitized, publicist-approved, "we remain great friends" kind. The kind where you genuinely can't look at someone without feeling it in your whole body. The long-distance element played a role too. Evans was constantly filming abroad. John had modeling commitments taking him around the globe. 2 careers at full throttle, 2 egos, 2 passionate people, and an ocean between them more often than not. It was a recipe for implosion. And here's the thing that makes this even more poignant. For years, neither of them ever officially confirmed the relationship. There were photos, there were rumors, there were cryptic Instagram posts that fans analyzed like ancient texts. But the actual confirmation? That came from Luke's memoir, a full decade after they first met. He could have left John out entirely. But he didn't, because clearly, that relationship deserved to be named. It deserved its chapter. It deserved to be acknowledged as the enormous, significant, life-shaping thing that it apparently was. But, and this is the silver lining that I genuinely needed, time healed things between them. In the memoir, Evans writes that they eventually reconnected at a mutual friend's birthday party. They hugged. They laughed. And he says that what he finds amazing is that they are now genuinely good friends who can look back at the chaos with some degree of lightness, from suitcases in New York winters to laughing at a birthday party. That is a character arc. Okay, but John wasn't the end of Luke Evans's romantic story, not by a long shot. So what happened after the flamenco imploded, and who did he date in the years between that heartbreak and the man he's with today? The in-between, Victor, Raphael, and the years of healing. After John, Luke Evans navigated a few more relationships. And look, bless this man, because he clearly felt everything deeply and just kept showing up and trying. That takes courage, honestly, especially after the kind of volcanic heartbreak he'd been through. Around 2018, speculation started swirling about Luke and a man named Victor Turpin, a Colombian-born actor known for roles in films like Bad Boys for Life. Victor is genuinely handsome and talented, and the two were spotted together at various events and on holidays. But they kept things extremely low-key, very different from how open Luke had been with John. It's believed they were together for roughly a year before parting ways in early 2019. No dramatic memoir chapter for Victor, no flamenco metaphors, just a quiet relationship that ran its course. Then came Rafael Olara, and this one felt different to anyone watching from the outside. Because with Rafael, Luke Evans started posting, like actually posting cute couple content on Instagram. There was a video in February 2020. Luke shared it with the caption, "He loves my Welsh humor. No, honestly, he does." Which is, objectively, the most adorable thing. Imagine Luke Evans being all Welsh and theatrical, and his boyfriend just standing there being like, "Yes, this is the person I chose. I am very happy about this." Their relationship overlapped with the early pandemic period, which must have been an interesting time to be in a new relationship, stuck in one place, navigating the world shutting down. But by January 2021, Evans confirmed to the Times that they had parted ways after about a year together, saying simply, "It is what it is. It is what it is." Those 4 words are doing so much heavy lifting. That's the quote of someone who has made peace with something but still feels the weight of it. No blame, no drama, just an acknowledgement that sometimes love isn't enough to make something last. And then they unfollowed each other on Instagram, which, if you've ever been through a breakup in the social media age, you know is its own specific kind of grief. Watching those little follower numbers change, seeing the posts disappear. It's modern heartbreak in its purest form. So by 2021, Luke Evans was single again. He'd had the volcanic passion of John. He'd had the quieter, more private connection with Victor. He'd had the Instagram official sweetness with Rafael. And none of them had stuck. He was 43 years old, globally successful, beloved by millions, and still searching for the person who would actually feel like home. And then, completely by accident, on a film set in Colombia, he found him. Because the man who finally made Luke Evans say, "We're building a life together," was someone nobody expected, in a place nobody would have predicted. So who exactly is Fran Tomás? And how did this architect from Madrid manage to capture the heart of a Hollywood action hero? Enter Fran Tomás, the one who finally made it click. Picture the scene. It's 2021. Luke Evans is in Colombia for a film project. He's far from home, deep in a shoot, and, as has happened before, he meets someone. His name is Fran Tomás. He's from Madrid. He's an architect and project manager. He is absolutely not a celebrity. And in a life that has been filled with beautiful, famous, complicated people, maybe that's exactly the point. Fran Tomás isn't someone who grew up in Hollywood's orbit. He doesn't have a publicist. He wasn't photographed at Cannes. He's a grounded, real-world person who builds things for a living. And apparently, he was exactly what Luke Evans didn't know he was looking for. But here's the catch. Almost immediately after they met, Evans had to leave Colombia and go back to his life. And he braced himself for the disappointment he'd felt before, the way his career had eaten previous relationships alive. In his 2024 cover interview with Out magazine, Evans recalled that very moment of dread. "I thought, oh, here we go, another victim of my career, my new relationship, and somehow we managed to make it work." Somehow, they managed to make it work. And now, years later, Luke Evans literally cannot stop talking about this man in interviews, and it is the most wholesome thing in the world. Because this is the same person who once stormed out of a New York apartment in winter with a suitcase, who described a relationship as addictive and full of fury and torment. And now he's on the cover of Out magazine in 2024 saying, "He's a great human being. He's the best part of me for sure. He's kind, calm, he's happy, he's positive, he's a hard worker. He literally makes me a better person." The best part of me. I need you to understand the seismic shift those words represent. After everything, after John, after the flamenco, after the suitcase in the snow, Luke Evans found someone and looked at them and said, "You are the best part of me. Not the most exciting, not the most dramatic, not the most addictive, the best." There's a maturity in that word choice that tells you everything about where Luke Evans is in his life right now. In a separate interview with People magazine, Evans described Fran with the kind of clarity that comes from really knowing someone. "We're a great team in life. He's my best friend. He's the calm, deep waters, and I am the rushing, bubbly water. And between the two of us, we can solve anything." The calm, deep waters versus the rushing, bubbly water. Where did this poet come from? Who told Luke Evans he was allowed to be this romantic in public? I am completely undone. And the partnership they've built goes way beyond the relationship. These two aren't just partners in life, they're business partners too. Together, they co-founded BDXY, a men's clothing and lifestyle brand that sells underwear, swimwear, and wardrobe essentials. In 2025, they did a photo shoot for the brand's swimwear collection where they were both photographed in swimming trunks, apparently having gone straight from the pool to the camera. Which is, obviously, a lot to process, and I will be thinking about it for several years. But more than the business, more than the aesthetics, more than the beautiful social media content, it's the everyday quality of what Evans describes that gets me. In that same Out cover story, he summed it all up. We're best friends. We travel together, we work together, we work on the brand together. And we're building a life together. We're happy. And I'm very grateful that I've met that person. Grateful. The word he chose was grateful. Not obsessed, not addicted, not swept away. Grateful. That is the language of someone who has been through enough to know what actually matters. Who has had the flamenco and survived it, and now understands that real love isn't supposed to feel like a natural disaster. Fran Tomas also keeps Luke Evans grounded in a very literal sense. In his Out interview, Evans reflected on what that stability means to him. "My partner, he keeps me grounded and keeps me calm in this strange world that I live in." Because being Luke Evans, being an internationally famous, constantly working, perpetually photographed person, is genuinely disorienting. And having someone in your life who just isn't impressed by any of that, who sees you as the rushing, bubbly water that sometimes needs calming, that's everything. But this story isn't just about who Luke Evans has loved. It's about what his willingness to tell this story actually means and why it matters beyond the gossip. So let's get into that, because I think this is actually the most important part of everything we've talked about today. What Luke Evans' story actually means, the bigger picture. Here's the thing that I think gets lost when we talk about celebrity relationships, because we love a good love story. We love the drama, we love the timeline, but there's something underneath all of this that's worth naming. Luke Evans didn't have to write any of this. He didn't have to name John Cortajarena. He didn't have to describe the suitcase in the snow. He didn't have to tell the world that Fran Thomas is the best part of him, or that his previous relationship was like flamenco, passionate and destructive in equal measure. He is famous enough, established enough, that he could have published a perfectly lovely memoir about his career and his childhood and left his love life entirely out of it. But he didn't, because he made a deliberate choice at 46 to tell the whole story. And I think that decision says something really significant about who Luke Evans has become. He came out publicly in the early 2000s when he was doing theater, long before Hollywood ever entered the picture. And then, when Hollywood arrived, there was a period where things got murkier. His personal life became more guarded. His romantic history became a subject for speculation rather than open conversation. Because the industry he was trying to break into had a very specific idea of what an action hero was supposed to look like, and openly gay wasn't typically part of the brief. He has since been described as the first openly gay action hero in Hollywood, something he has spoken about with a kind of quiet, considered pride. Not shouting from the rooftops, not making it a campaign, just existing successfully, visibly, playing tough guys, playing villains, playing romantic leads, and being openly, unapologetically gay throughout all of it. In a 2025 interview with NBC News to coincide with the memoir's North American release, Evans reflected on that responsibility. "I was never going to shout it from the rooftops. It is not who I am, never has been. But it does mean things are changing in a positive way." And the memoir is, in many ways, the culmination of that quiet visibility. Because in it, he doesn't just mention being gay in passing, he writes in detail about his relationships with men, about falling for John Cortajarena, about the chaos and the passion and the heartbreak, about finding Fran Thomas and realizing what love is supposed to feel like. He names names, he describes feelings, he gives the full, human, messy, beautiful picture. And the response has been extraordinary. Since the memoir's publication, Evans has talked about receiving messages from people all over the world. People who grew up in religious households and felt trapped by their faith's expectations. People who were bullied for their sexuality before they even had the vocabulary to understand it. People who loved someone who felt like flamenco and survived it. People who are still looking for their calm, deep waters. His story reached them, and that's because he told it fully rather than safely. There's also something I want to highlight about the way Luke Evans talks about his relationship with Fran Thomas, because it's not just swoony, though it is absolutely swoony. It's also a really healthy depiction of what a good partnership actually looks like. He talks about them being a team, about working together and building something together, about Fran grounding him, about being best friends. This isn't the intoxicating, devastating passion of his earlier relationships. This is something quieter and steadier and, apparently, much more sustaining. And that contrast between the flamenco of John and the calm, deep waters of Fran is almost like a roadmap through Luke Evans's emotional development as a person. He needed the fireworks to understand what he ultimately wanted was warmth. At 46, Luke Evans is doing his most personal, most courageous work. Not the action sequences, not the red carpets, not the Forbes profiles, writing a memoir that says, "Here is who I loved." Here is how it went. Here is what I learned. Here is where I am now. And then putting it out into the world for anyone who needs it. So, let's bring it all home. Because what I find most remarkable about Luke Evans's story, beyond the drama, beyond the gorgeous men, beyond the suitcase in the snow, is the through line of someone learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, what he actually needed. He needed the flamenco to know he could survive heartbreak. He needed the quieter relationships to understand what peace felt like in comparison. And he needed Fran Thomas to finally understand that love wasn't supposed to be addictive. It was supposed to feel like home. At 46, with a memoir on the shelves, a fashion brand with his partner, and interviews where he calls that partner the best part of him, Luke Evans is living proof that the story isn't over until it's over. That the right person can show up in the most unexpected place, in the middle of a film shoot in Colombia, and change the whole trajectory. And the fact that he chose to write all of this down, the passion and the fury, the heartbreak and the healing, the flamenco and the calm, deep waters, so that other people could read it and feel less alone. That's not just a love story. That's a gift. If you made it to the very end of this video, first of all, you are exactly my kind of person, and I love you for it. Second of all, please hit that like button right now, because it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who are ready for this level of tea. If you're new here and you want more in-depth celebrity deep dives, relationship timelines, and the stories behind the headlines that everyone's talking about, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. We do this kind of thing regularly, and it only gets more unhinged from here. And I need you to drop a comment below because I have a burning question. Are you Team Flamenco? Do you think the John Cortajarena era was Luke's most significant relationship? Or are you Team Calm, Deep Waters, firmly believing that Fran Thomas is his endgame and this is the love story that was always supposed to stick? Tell me everything. I will read every single comment. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and if nothing else, let Luke Evans' story remind you that your people are out there. Sometimes they're just in Colombia, waiting for you to show up on a film set. Bye.